All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're not just rehashing a chaotic series of Middle Eastern battles. Instead, we're going to treat this like a highly classified intelligence briefing. We're going to peel back the curtain and look at the hidden mechanics, the secret back channel diplomacy, and those immense superpower pressures that actually start, pause, and stop these regional wars. Think of this as analyzing 77 years of synchronized conflict straight from the desk of a Cold War intelligence officer.
So, a absolutely crucial question to ask here is, how do Middle Eastern wars actually end? It's so easy to just focus on the battlefield, right? But honestly, as an intelligence analyst looking through decades of raw data, I can tell you there's a massive illusion at play. The illusion is that these wars are won purely with guns, tanks, and brilliant tactical maneuvers. But the reality? The reality is way more clinical, and it usually happens miles and miles away from any actual front line.
And this really hits the nail on the head. Look at these statements from 1956. We've got US President Eisenhower literally saying, "Stop or we destroy the pound sterling," while Soviet Premier Khrushchev threatens, "We are in possession of terrible weapons." I mean, wow, these aren't battlefield generals coordinating troops. These are superpower leaders talking directly to prime ministers. It brilliantly illustrates the core truth we're uncovering today. Regional conflicts are abruptly stopped by the terrifying calculus of global powers just picking up the telephone.
So here's our roadmap for the briefing today. We're going to cover 5 core mechanisms. First up, the multi-front logistical illusion. Second, the propaganda survival doctrine. Third, the secret back-channel lifelines. Fourth, the superpower telephone veto. And finally, we'll wrap up with the brutal mathematics of diplomacy. Let's get into it.
Okay, Section 1. The multi-front logistical illusion, or synchronizing the chaos of war. Let's look at how military commanders manage the sheer logistical nightmare of simultaneous multi-front surprise attacks.
Because to really grasp how a ceasefire works, you first have to understand the synchronized chaos of the initial mobilization. Take the 1973 Yom Kippur War, for example. Look at the sheer scale of what went down at exactly 2:05 p.m. You've got 2,000 artillery pieces opening fire at the exact same moment, 222 commandos swimming the Suez Canal, high-pressure water cannons blasting through sand ramparts, allowing 8,000 infantry to cross in literally 10 minutes. It's a logistical marvel, requiring flawless, minute-by-minute execution across multiple borders to completely overwhelm the defenses. It's this massive, sudden explosion of coordinated military energy. But, as you'll see, stopping that energy, that is an entirely different beast.
And this brings us to a really critical realization, perfectly illustrated by the 1948 UN ceasefire. Diplomatic pauses are absolutely not the same thing as peace. Actually, scratch that. They're more like strategic reloads. Just look at the timeline here. The ceasefire hits on June 11th. Almost immediately, the Arab supply lines just completely break down, with corrupt leadership essentially leaving their soldiers out there to starve. Meanwhile, what's Israel doing during that exact same pause? They're using the silence to secretly import Czech aircraft, build an entire air force from scratch, and mobilize 65,000 soldiers for the next round. It just goes to show that the side that prepares best while the guns are silent is the one that completely dominates when they start firing again.
Moving on to Section 2, the propaganda survival doctrine. Here, we'll look at civilian broadcasts versus battlefield reality. To really understand the chaos on the ground, we have to contrast the absolute breakdown of official diplomatic channels with the loud, public propaganda that was actually dictating military decisions. There is just this glaring, unbelievable contrast between what the public was hearing and the grim reality sitting on intelligence desks. In 1948, Cairo radio was broadcasting that Arab armies are restoring order. In 1967, Damascus radio is claiming Syrian forces are winning. But behind closed doors, the intelligence proved the exact opposite. Advances had completely stalled in 48, and in 67, Syria lost 53 planes and 60 airmen in a single day. Leaders were desperately broadcasting these triumphant, synchronized victories purely to ensure their own domestic political survival. They created this massive, dangerous gap between a fabricated public narrative and the severe casualties that analysts were tracking. Basically, domestic stability frequently overruled actual military objectives.
And, this propaganda had incredibly fatal consequences. Take 1967, for instance. Egyptian Field Marshal Amir flat out lied to King Hussein of Jordan, insisting Egypt was winning and their forces were successfully advancing. Relying entirely on this face-saving fabricated propaganda, King Hussein entered the war. It was a disaster. His forces were decimated without proper air cover, and Jordan lost the entire West Bank and East Jerusalem. As he later admitted with devastating clarity, it was the worst decision of my life. I was lied to.
So that brings us to Section 3,
the secret back-channel lifelines. Because while the radios were blaring these huge messages of victory and ideological solidarity, what was actually happening in the shadows?
The real key takeaway here is that behind all the public posturing, these regional leaders were constantly, and I mean constantly, maneuvering just to survive. We're talking secret meetings like King Abdullah of Jordan sitting down with Golda Meir back in November 1947, or in May 1948, when Jordan's Arab Legion was secretly aiming just to hold the West Bank rather than actually attempting to destroy Israel. Fast forward to 1956, and King Hussein uses British pressure as an excuse to conveniently stay out of the Suez War entirely. Even in 1973, Jordan sends just the bare minimum of forces to satisfy the demands of Arab solidarity, all while holding a secret peace understanding. Through these private, hidden back channels, leaders consistently prioritized calculated political survival over traditional sweeping military ideologies.
All right, Section 4, the superpower telephone veto. And this is where we get into the terrifying Cold War calculus that can literally freeze armies in their tracks.
The 1956 Suez Crisis is just the perfect textbook demonstration of this dynamic. Picture this, it's November 5th. Israeli, British, and French forces are sweeping through the Sinai and landing at Port Said. It looks like total military dominance. But then, the very next morning, Washington and Moscow pick up the phone. US President Eisenhower threatens to absolutely destroy the British economy by targeting the pound sterling. And Soviet Premier Khrushchev takes it even further. He literally threatens nuclear consequences on London, Paris, and Tel Aviv. The result? By 11:59 p.m. that very same day, Britain caves and announces an immediate ceasefire. Think about that. International phone calls and severe economic or nuclear threats forced a sudden, humiliating pause in active, winning military operations.
Now, this intense Cold War brinkmanship really peaked during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Early in the conflict, as Israel faced the real potential of military collapse, they actually began nuclear preparations. The Soviet Union detected this shift and immediately threatened to unilaterally send their own troops into Egypt. How did the United States respond? They escalated global military readiness to DEFCON 3. In the blink of an eye, the entire globe was pushed right to the absolute edge of nuclear annihilation, all over a regional conflict.
And you can see exactly how this superpower tension completely overrides what happens on the ground. During that same 1973 war, you have a moment of unauthorized, brilliant battlefield logistics. General Ariel Sharon goes against his orders, secretly crosses the Suez Canal, and manages to entirely surround and trap the Egyptian Third Army. He creates a massive tactical advantage. But almost instantly, the superpowers step in and force a simultaneous ceasefire. Washington and Moscow basically vetoed those hard-won battlefield gains right on the spot to maintain their delicate global balance. Ultimately, the generals don't end these wars. The superpowers do.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, the brutal mathematics of diplomacy, looking at 77 years of synchronized casualties. When we pull back and look at the macro data from the intelligence desk, the clinical math is just brutal. Looking at this timeline spanning from 1948 all the way to the conflict stretching into 2026, we see a synchronized pattern of immense devastation. We're talking roughly 14,500 Israeli deaths compared to over 150,000 combined Arab and Palestinian deaths. Every single time these armies clashed, it resulted in massive, wildly disproportionate casualties. And yet, despite all that bloodshed, the foundational political questions, the very reasons the fighting erupted back in 1947, still remain completely unanswered.
What this data tells us is a pretty sobering truth. Military power, for all its might, is really just a tool for holding ground on any given day. It has never actually decided who the ground permanently belongs to. Those ceasefires we talked about, the ones dictated by superpowers, they act as strategic pauses, but they are not lasting peace agreements. They freeze the armies in place, but they certainly don't fix the borders. And unfortunately, isolated leaders sitting safely behind desks or in bunkers continue to send their populations back into the meat grinder without sharing any of that visceral fear felt by the actual people on the ground.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about this final question. The guns have been speaking for 77 years. But if it's superpower phone calls and secret back-channel deals that actually control the battlefield, if brilliant military victories are instantly vetoed by Cold War calculations, then who truly holds the power to break this synchronized cycle of violence? Because until that secret diplomacy finally yields a political answer that both sides can actually live with, every ceasefire is just a reload. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.